story. It's got to be 30 years ago. I think the meaning of the story stood out for me. When you read complicated material, sometimes a piece of it will stand out. It's like it glitters. That might be one way of thinking about it. You're in sync with it, and you can understand what it means. And I think I understood what this part of the story of Noah meant. What nakedness meant in the story of Adam and Eve. To know yourself naked is to become aware of your vulnerability, your physical boundaries in time and space, and your fundamental physiological insufficiencies as they might be judged by others. There's biological insufficiency that's sort of built into you because you're a fragile, mortal, vulnerable, half-insane creature. That's just an existential truth. And so to become aware of your nakedness is to become self-conscious. That's what is revealed to Ham when he comes across his father naked. And so the question is, what does it mean to see your father naked? And especially in an inappropriate manner like this, it's as if he's insufficiently respectful of his father. And the question is exactly, what does the father represent? And you can say, well, there's the father that you have, and that's a human being, that's a man like other men. But then there's the father as such, and that's the spirit of the father. And insofar as you have a father, you have both at the same time. You have the personal father that's a man among other men, just like anyone else's father. But insofar as that man is your father, that means that he's something different than just another person. And what he is the incarnation of the spirit of the Father. And to see that, to disrespect that carelessly, Noah makes a mistake, right? He produces wine and gets himself drunk, and you might say, well, if he's sprawled out there for everyone to see, it's hardly Ham's fault if he stumbles across him. But the book is laying out a danger. The danger is that maybe you catch your father at his most vulnerable moment, and if you're disrespectful, then you transgress against the spirit of the Father. And if you transgress against the spirit of the Father and lose respect for the spirit of the Father, then that is likely to transform you into a
triumphant academic setting here, an obvious question is how much of this work of adjusting our default setting involves actual knowledge or intellect. This question gets very tricky. Probably the most dangerous thing about an academic education, at least in my own case, is that it enables my tendency to over-intellectualize stuff. To get lost in abstract arguments inside my head instead of simply paying attention to what's going on right in front of me. Paying attention to what is going on inside me. As I'm sure you guys know by now, it is extremely difficult to stay alert and attentive instead of getting hypnotized by the constant monologue inside your own head. Maybe happening right now. 20 years after my own graduation, I have come gradually to understand that the liberal arts cliche about teaching you how to think is actually shorthand for a much deeper, more serious idea. Learning how to think really means learning how to exercise some control over how and what you think. It means being conscious and aware enough to choose what you pay attention to and to choose how you construct meaning from experience. Learning how to think. 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 Because if you cannot exercise this kind of choice in adult life, you will be totally hosed. Think of the old cliche about, quote, the mind being an excellent servant but a terrible master. This, like many cliches, so lame and unexciting on the surface, actually expresses a great and terrible truth. It is not the least bit coincidental that adults who commit suicide with firearms almost always shoot themselves in the head. head. They shoot the terrible master. And the truth is that most of these suicides are actually dead long before they pull the trigger. And I submit that this is what the real, no bullshit value of your liberal arts education is supposed to be about. How to keep from going through your comfortable, prosperous, respectable adult life dead. Unconscious. A slave to your head and to your natural default setting of being uniquely, completely, imperially alone. Day in and day out. That may sound like hyperbole or abstract nonsense. Let's get concrete. The plain fact is that you graduating seniors do not yet have any clue what day in, day out really means. Learning how to think. 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 Learning how to think.
Tell the truth, or at least don't lie. Do not do things that you hate. Act so that you can tell the truth about how you act. Pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. If you have to choose, be the one who does things instead of the one who is seen to do things. Pay attention. Assume that the person you are listening to might know something you need to know. Listen to them hard enough so that they will share it with you. Plan and work diligently to maintain the romance in your relationships. Be careful who you share good news with. Be careful who you share bad news with. Make at least one thing better every single place you go. Imagine who you could be, and then aim single-mindedly at that. Do not allow yourself to become arrogant or resentful. Try to make one room in your house as beautiful as possible. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. Work as hard as you possibly can on at least one thing and see what happens. If old memories still make you cry, write them down carefully and completely. Maintain your connections with people. Do not carelessly denigrate social institutions or artistic achievement. Treat yourself as if you were someone that you are responsible for helping. Ask someone to do you a best for you. Do not try to rescue someone who does not want to be rescued. And be very careful about rescuing someone who does. Nothing well done is insignificant. Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. Dress like the person you want to be. Be precise in your speech. Stand up straight with your shoulders back. Don't avoid something frightening if it stands in your way, but don't do unnecessarily dangerous things. Do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. Do not transform your wife into a maid. Do not hide unwanted things in the form. Notice that opportunity lurks where responsibility has been abdicated. Read something written by someone great. Pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. Do not bother children when they are skateboarding. Don't let bullies get away with it. Write a letter to the government. You see something that needs fixing. Propose a solution. Remember that what you do not yet know is more important than what you already know. Be grateful. In spite of your suffering.
Then the great problem is how to get that higher self working. How does it make any difference to what you do and what you think? I know all kinds of people who've got this higher self going, practicing their yoga, but they're just like ordinary people. Sometimes a little worse. And they can fool themselves. Fool themselves. They can fool themselves. They can say, for example, well, my point of view in religion is very liberal. I believe that all religions have divine revelation in them. But I don't understand the way you people will fight about it. You fight, say that We, Jehovah's Witnesses, have the real religion. The real religion. Others say, well, we Roman Catholics have it. And the Muslims say, no, it is in the Quran. And this is the right way. 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 And somebody else gets up, and he may be a rather highbrow Catholic, and say, well, God has given the Spirit through all the traditions, but ours is the most refined and mature. And then somebody comes along and says, well, as I said, they're all equally revelations of the divine. And in seeing this, of course, I'm much more tolerant than you are. You see how that game is going to work? Yeah, I can take this position. Supposing you regard me as some sort of a guru, and you know how gurus hate each other. They're always putting each other down. And I could say, well, I don't put other gurus down. See, that outwits all of them. See, we're always doing that. We're always finding a way to be one up. And by the most incredibly subtle means. So you see that, you see? And you say, I realize I'm always doing that. And tell me, how do I not do that? How do I not do that? This is the right way. This is the right way. This is the right way. How do I not do that? This is the right way. How do I not do that? This is the right way. This is the right way. This is the right way. How do I not do that? This is the right way. How do I not do that? Say, why do you want to know? Well, I'd be better that way. Yeah, but why do you want to be better? Why do you want to be better? Why do you want to be better? You see, the reason you want to be better is the reason why you aren't. We aren't better because we want to be. Because the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Because all the do-gooders in the world, whether they're doing good for others or doing it for themselves, are troublemakers. Troublemakers. On the basis of kindly let me help you or you'll drown, said the monkey, putting the fish safely up a tree. Kindly let me help you or you'll drown, said the monkey, putting the fish safely up a tree. Kindly let me help you or you'll drown, said the monkey, putting the fish safely up a tree. Kindly let me help you or you'll drown, said the monkey, putting the fish safely up a tree. Kindly let me help you or you'll drown, said the monkey, putting the fish safely up a tree. Kindly let me help you or you'll drown, said the monkey, putting the fish safely up a tree.
One such part involves boredom, routine, and petty frustration. The parents and older folks here will know all too well what I'm talking about. of example, let's say it's an average adult day, and you get up in the morning, go to your challenging white-collar college graduate job, and you work hard for 8 or 10 hours, and at the end of the day you're tired and somewhat stressed, and all you want is to go home and have a good supper and maybe unwind for an hour and then hit the sack early, because of course you have to get up the next day and do it all again. But then you remember there's no food at home. You haven't had time to shop this week because of your challenging job. And so now, after work, you have to get in your car and drive to the supermarket. It's the end of a work day, and the traffic is apt to be very bad. So getting to the store takes way longer than it should. And when you finally get there, the supermarket is very crowded, because of course it's the time of day when all the other people with jobs also try to squeeze in some grocery shopping. And the store is hideously fluorescently lit and infused with soul-killing muzak or corporate pop, and it's pretty much the last place you want to be. But you can't just get in and quickly out. You have to wander all over the huge, overlit store's confusing aisles to find the stuff you want. And you have to maneuver your junky cart through all these other tired, hurried people with carts. And eventually, you get all your supper supplies, except now it turns out there aren't enough checkout lanes open, even though it's the end of the day rush. So the checkout line is incredibly long, which is stupid and infuriating. Stupid and infuriating. Which is stupid and infuriating. Stupid and infuriating. But you can't take your frustration out on the frantic lady working the register, who is overworked at a job whose daily tedium and meaninglessness surpasses the imagination of any of us here at a prestigious college. But anyway, you finally get to the checkout line's front, and you pay for your food, and get told to have a nice day, in a voice that is the absolute voice of death. And then you have to take your creepy, flimsy plastic bags of groceries in your cart with the one crazy wheel that pulls maddeningly to the left, all the way out through the crowded, bumpy, littery parking lot. And then you have to drive all the way home through slow, heavy, SUV-intensive rush hour traffic, etc., etc. Everyone here has done this, of course. But it hasn't yet been part of you graduates' actual life routine. Day after week, after month, after year. 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 But it will be. But it will be. But it will be. And many more dreary, annoying, seemingly meaningless routines besides. But that is not the point. The point is that petty, frustrating crap like this is exactly where the work of choosing is going to come in. Because the traffic jams and crowded aisles and long checkout lines give me time to think. And if I don't make a conscious decision about how to think and what to pay attention to, I'm going to be pissed and miserable every time I have to shop. Because my natural default setting is the certainty that situations like this are really all about me. About my hungriness and my fatigue and my desire to just get home. And it's going to seem for all the world like everybody else is just in my way. And who are all these people in my way? And look at how repulsive most of them are, and how stupid and cow-like and dead-eyed and non-human they seem in the checkout line. Or at how annoying and rude it is that people are talking loudly on cell phones in the middle of the line. And look at how deeply, personally unfair this is. Or, of course, if I'm in a more socially conscious liberal arts form of my default setting, I can spend time in the end-of-the-day traffic being disgusted about all the huge, stupid, lane-blocking SUVs and Hummers and V12 pickup trucks burning their wasteful, selfish 40-gallon tanks of gas. And I can dwell on the fact that the patriotic or religious bumper stickers always seem to be on the biggest, most disgustingly selfish vehicles, driven by the ugliest... This is an example of how not to think. after week, after month, after year. Day 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 after week, after month, after year.
Looks good. Pretty tasty. I don't want to risk it.
Akira the Don. In exploring the theme of the web of life, I have thus far discussed two principal topics. First, the web considered as selectivity, experience considered as what we pay attention to on the one hand and what we ignore on the other. And I showed how the way in which we pay attention to the world creates, isolates, that we call particular things, events, and persons, and they seem to be disconnected and to be alone because we ignore the connection between them. And I used the analogy of weaving, where the threads go underneath and join on the back in a way that is not seen on the front. So you might say in the unconscious, although I don't particularly like that word, because it makes it seem as if it was something rather dead. But on the unconscious side of life, as on the back of the weaving or the back of the embroidery, there are connections which are not published. 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 Now, in the second part of the theme was the web as mutuality. When I discussed the way the existence of a web, the existence of cloth, or anything like that, depends on a mutual support of the warp and the woof. And this miraculous thing occurs that when the things support each other, being comes into being. Cloth comes into being. And so in exactly the same way, our world is a manifestation of relativity. And this requires a balance, combination, a relationship of opposites in every domain of life. And although these opposites are explicitly different and even antagonistic, they are implicitly one. Implicitly one. They are implicitly one. And that's the secret. There are connections which are not published. A relationship of opposites in every domain of life. There are connections which are not published. There are connections which are not published. A relationship of opposites in every domain of life. There are connections which are not published. They are implicitly one. And that's the secret. See, these two secrets that we went into. The connection between what are supposed to be separate things and events and the mutual unity between what are manifestly, that is to say, openly, for purposes of publication, opposites. Now, I'm going to take two other aspects of the web. There are connections which
my lab where I had underperforming graduate students. And one of the things that was really awful about that was that it was really hard on the high-performing graduate students, because they felt that even being in the same category as the people who weren't working hard and pulling their weight devalued what they were doing.
And that's exactly right. And so this is also why there's a conscientiousness trait and an agreeableness trait. Because conscientious people judge you on your accomplishment, right? They don't give a damn about your feelings. Not a bit. It's like, are you doing the work or not? Whereas agreeable people think, well, your mother's sick and you've got a bunch of family problems and we all have to take care of each other and it's no wonder that you're having a rough time. Like, you can't say that one of those attitudes is correct and the other isn't correct. You can't say that. There wouldn't be those two dimensions if there wasn't something correct about both of them. But you can certainly point out that often they conflict. And so the demand for inclusiveness, unity, and care, and the demand for high-level performance in a hierarchical structure are very different orientations in the world. And so it's complicated for people who are agreeable and conscientious. 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 One of the things that happens very often in psychotherapy, people come to psychotherapy for multiple reasons, but one of them is they often come because they're too agreeable. And so what they get is so-called assertiveness training, although it's not exactly assertiveness that's being trained. What it is the ability to learn how to negotiate on your own behalf. And one of the things I tell agreeable people, especially if they're conscientious, is say what you think. Tell the truth about what you think. There's going to be things you think that you think are nasty and harsh. And they probably are nasty and harsh, but they're also probably true. And you need to bring those up to the forefront and deliver the message. And it's not straightforward at all because agreeable people do not like conflict. Not at all. They smooth the water. It takes a lot of conflict to solve problems in the short term. That can spiral up to where it's dangerous, which it can if it gets uncontrolled. It might be safer in the short term to keep the water smooth and to not delve into those situations where conflict emerges. The problem with that is it's not a very good medium to long-term strategy. So lots of times there are things you have to talk about because they're not going to go away. Agreeable and conscientious. 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 And so partly what you do with agreeable people is you get them to figure out, and they have a hard time with this too. If you ask a disagreeable person what he wants, say, or she wants, they'll tell you right away. They know. It's like, this is what I want, and this is how I'm going to get it. But agreeable people, especially if they're really agreeable, are so agreeable that they often don't even know what they want. Because they're so accustomed to living for other people and to finding out what other people want and to try to make them comfortable and so forth, that it's harder for them to find a sense of their own desires as they move through life. Agreeable and conscientious. 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 Agreeable and conscientious.
Clinical psychologist, and I've spent 20 hours a week for 25 years listening to people tell me about their lives. And those people were people who were just barely hanging on to the bottom of the world, up to people who were so successful
might think, well, I'm a real fixer-upper, and I'm really embarrassed about that because there's 50 things wrong with me, and like, look at that guy, and so now I feel all terrible because of the comparison and all of that. And first of all, it's unfair, especially by the time you're about 30. Your life has become quite idiosyncratic. Let's say your life has 8 dimensions: family, friends, intimate relationships. You're individually positioned in all those dimensions. Your life isn't like anyone else's life. See someone who's doing better than you, it's like you're only seeing one dimension at one slice of time, so it's not reasonable. You don't have the whole picture, and then you get down on yourself and take the spirit out of yourself, then you get bitter and resentful. There's nothing good about that, but you do need to improve. There's not as much of you as there should be, so what's the comparison? Well, that's easy. Just say, okay, well, here's my position in time and space right now. Here's my virtues and faults. I can be a little bit better tomorrow in some minor way. Well, that's the right comparison, because you are very much like you. Everything's the same about you. Everything's the same about you. And so it's the perfect comparison. You just don't have insight into the tragedy of someone else's life. You might think, well, he's rich and successful. It's like, yeah, but you just don't know. You don't know what his relationship is with his wife or his children. You don't know that he's gone through 2 divorces and his daughter won't talk to him and one of his kids is schizophrenic. And the point is, you should be better than you are, but it's not because you're worse than other people. It's because you're not everything you should be. And so you got to pick the comparison right. And then that's also ennobling and instantly hopeful. There is absolutely no doubt that you can be slightly better tomorrow than you are today. There is definitely something that you can do today that will make you slightly better for the next day. Always. Okay. You're 85, you have Alzheimer's, you're done. Sometimes you're done. Most of the time you're not, and most of the time there's something within your grasp that you could put right. See, that's the fundamental issue. It's like life is tragic. It's full of suffering and it's full of malevolence. There's no doubt about that. And it's brutal. It's more brutal than you can even imagine in some ways, or willing to imagine. But there's something you could put right. And we don't know what would happen if you put everything you could right, if you put it right. And then we don't know what would happen if everyone did that. But you can be certain that it would be less tragic and less malevolent. And so, like,
path towards figuring out the user interface. It's important that you know how I got there so that you can have some trust that there's something to it. When I was a kid, I was influenced, as was my mother, by a book, The Power of Positive Thinking, by Norman Vincent Peale, that suggested that you could somehow change your life, or maybe you were changing reality, if you could simply think positively. Think positively. Think positively. Think positively. So this was my first introduction to the concept that maybe reality was not fixed and something that you were a victim of, but rather you could do something. There was some mechanism, some technique, some tools you could use to get some control over your environment and your life, as opposed to having it control you. And that was my first thought, that reality could be programmable in at least some simple sense. But of course, I embarked on a lifetime of exploration to find out if I could find out more about how to program reality. Think positively. Think positively. Think positively. exist. Of course, mushrooms let you see the world in a completely different reality. And all of these things, from studying all the different religions to doing affirmations, which is really just visualizing what you want and writing it out every day. Visualizing what you want and writing it out every day. And then learning persuasion. These all had the same cumulative effect of teaching me that reality was indeed far more subjective than you're led to believe. And when I say reality is subjective, I don't mean that there isn't some base reality that's real. What I mean is that we don't have access to it. In other words, just take religion. Two people with completely different religions can go into a store, they can shop, they can get married, have children. They don't really need to reconcile the fact that they live in different worlds. One thinks there's an afterlife, one thinks there's reincarnation, one thinks there's nothing, and yet we all survive and thrive and reproduce. There's nothing to suggest that our brains are the kind of brains that can understand reality. Instead, all of the evidence suggests that we can put filters, optionally and somewhat subjectively, on our reality, and the thing that we deal with is a filter. We're not dealing with the underlying reality. Our filter on it is the thing that's real to us. And you can change those filters, so that's the important part. And you can change them fairly easily. And if you find a filter that predicts better and makes you happier, well, that's the better filter, even if it isn't a better approximation of reality. What matters is you're happy. What matters is you're getting what you need out of life. Think positively. Think positively. Think positively. How to program reality. Think positively. Think positively. Think positively. Program reality. You can change those filters. Change those filters. Change those filters. How to program reality. Think positively. Think positively. Think positively. So, once you accept that there's a subjective reality, you're starting to get ready to accept the user interface for that reality.
Hinduism speaks of the Godhead as uses the word Brahman. This is a neuter form in Sanskrit from the root Brih, which means to grow, to expand, to swell. The neuter form Brahman does not have quite the connotation then, you see, of kingship that we will find attached to the Western idea of God, but is also referred to as Atman. And this word we translate ordinarily the self. So you can have the Paramatman, which means para, the supreme self, or sometimes just the Atman alone, and that means the self in you. But the fundamental principle of Indian philosophy is Atman is Brahman. Your self is the supreme self. Atman is Brahman. Atman is Brahman. Atman is Brahman. Atman is Brahman. It is expressed also in the formula Tat Vam Asi, translated, you're it. Or tat, that, tuam, Latin, tuam, you, asi, you are that thou art. Tat, of course, is first word uttered by a baby.
What were you like when I was 25? Well, I was obsessed. When I was 25 or so, I probably weighed about 138 pounds. I smoked like a pack of cigarettes a day. I drank a tremendous amount of alcohol. My friends were heavy drinkers, and most of them dropped out of school by the time they were 15 or 16, went off to work on the oil rigs, and it was a rough town, and we drank a lot. I started when I was 14, and I had a lot of bad habits, and I wasn't in great shape physically. I was also still intellectually obsessed, as I am now. That would have been in 85. But I decided around then, about 85, 84, something like that, that I was really going to try to get my act together. So I started doing that. First of all, I quit smoking. Well, that took a long time because I eventually had to quit drinking too in order to quit smoking. And I started working out, started playing sports, which I'd never done. I was a small kid. I'd been skipped a grade, and I was small for my age, so sports were never really a domain of expertise for me. Although I skied and went traveling with my dad, traveling with my dad, traveling with my traveling with my traveling with my dad, traveling with my dad, traveling with my dad, traveling with my traveling with my traveling with my dad, traveling with my dad, traveling with my dad, traveling with my traveling with my traveling with my dad, traveling with my dad, traveling with my dad, traveling with my traveling with my traveling with my dad. What kind of relationship do you have with your father? Your real father? It's often ambivalent, right? There's an element of him that encouraged you, hopefully, because without the encouragement of your father, man, the world is a dismal place. It's very difficult to be a courageous person unless you have your father in body and spirit behind you. Because if your father rejects you or doesn't form a relationship with you, it's as if the spirit of civilization has left you outside the walls as of little worth. It's very difficult for people to recover from that. So the father should be an encouraging force, but can be a tyrannical and crushing force. That's a very difficult thing to get right. If you're my son, then I should impose the highest standards of behavior on you, and I should always be judging what you're doing. I should be judging it with the aim of making the best in you come forward, but getting that balance exactly right is very difficult. It's like the mother who's too overprotective. I'll never let anything happen to you. It's like, well, maybe you actually want to have something happen to you. It's like, no, I'm going to make you strong so any number of things can happen to you. And when you need some care, I'll be there. But otherwise, like out into the world with you, that's the right attitude. And for the father, it's like, get your bloody act together. Traveling with my dad. Traveling with my dad. Traveling with my traveling with my traveling with my dad. Traveling with my dad. Traveling with my dad. Traveling with my traveling with my traveling with my dad. Traveling with my dad. Traveling with my dad. Traveling with my traveling with my traveling with my dad. Traveling with my dad. Traveling with my dad. Traveling with my traveling with my traveling with my dad. I'm on your side. It's not because I want to destroy you or demean you or push you down in the dominance hierarchy, but because I want the best in you to emerge. And so you need standards. It's like, what are you doing wasting your life? There's way more than that to you. Get your act together and bring it out. And that's a message that people really want to hear if they have any sense at all. And generally, they do want to hear it. One of the things you could do for young people that no one's doing is to talk to them about responsibility. Everyone talks to young people about rights. It's like, we need our rights. It's like, oh God, how many rights do you need? You know, really, like you have more privileges than any people who've ever lived anywhere. Oh, it's so dull to hear this. So dull. It's so pathetic and demeaning. But you have to be protected and have your rights. There's a huge marketplace for responsibility. That's what you want to talk to young people about. It's like, life has meaning with responsibility. The more responsibility you take on, the more meaning your life has. And the higher degree of responsibility that you agree voluntarily to try to bear, the richer your life will be. And no one's ever told that, and it's the case. Dropping with my dad. Dropping with my dad. Dropping with my dropping with my dropping with my dad. Dropping with my dad. Dropping with my dad. Dropping with my dropping with my dropping with my dad. Dropping with my dad. Dropping with my dad. Dropping with my dropping with my dropping with my dad. Dropping with my dad. Dropping with my dad. Dropping with my dropping with my dropping with my dad.
Damn, son.
You have 4 kids, say, well, that's plenty of responsibility. You're going to have meaning. It's going to be rough, because it's complicated. You have a complicated job, and you try to help the careers of the people around you. You try to solve tough problems and aid suffering and do all of that. It's like, it's weight. It's responsibility. There's glory in it. There's real glory in it. There's deep meaning in it. And young people are starving for that because no one ever tells them that. It's like, you're way more than you think, man. Stand up. Do something difficult. Do something difficult and heroic. Burst out of your bonds. It's like, that's a good message. That's a necessary message. Because we have to be more than we are. Because if we aren't, we're not going to survive.
Damn, son. Where'd you find this?
Genie is the root word for genius. And it's a really interesting idea because there's this unlimited power that's associated with genius, but it's constrained. And that's really what the human spirit is like. Because it has this aspect of the infinite. And it is something that can grant wishes. But it's also constrained terribly. I don't ask God for favors. Or for wishes. Or for wishes. I don't ask God for favors. Or for wishes. Or for wishes. We're constrained mortally and physically and all that, but the thing is that both the infinite possibility and the constraint are necessary. That's what makes up the genie. It has to be both at the same time. And the idea that, if you find your genie, you can have your wishes. It's right. You have to really want what you're wishing for. Or you have to make the proper sacrifices to get it. It can't be just some whim. You have to ask for something that you would rather not have. Which is usually wisdom. Somebody asked me about prayer. They asked me if I prayed, and I thought, well, it depends on what you mean by that. Exactly. I don't ask God for favors. Or for wishes. Or for wishes. I don't ask God for favors. Or for wishes. Or for wishes. But I do think that if you sit on the edge of your bed and you ask what foolish thing you're doing to make it worse, you'll get an answer right now. And it won't be the one you want, but it might be the one that if you listen to would set things straight. I don't think that I've ever been in a situation where if something wasn't going right for me and I sat and thought, okay, I'm willing to figure out what I'm doing wrong, which is a big thing to think because you never know how much you're doing wrong. It might be something that you really don't want to contend with. But if you clear some space to meditate on that, probability that you'll figure out something that you did that was stupid, that's bending you and twisting you in the wind, you'll get an answer very, very rapidly. I don't ask God for favors. Or for wishes. Or for wishes. I don't ask God for favors. Or for wishes. Or for wishes. And it's not always how you do that. It's not like how you're manipulating your neurons or something. It happens of its own accord in some sense, like you can participate with it, I guess, and you can interfere with it, and it seems to take a certain amount of willpower, but it still all happens mysteriously, kind actually manage. I'd be willing to carry it out. And then you reorient the way you're thinking as a consequence of that, and something usually pops out of the abyss to guide you. Very strange, but it's not really any stranger than the fact that we can think at all. Because the fact that we can think is actually very strange. Strange like the fact that we can dream is strange. And that's strange beyond belief, that you can dream. Or that something in you dreams. Which is a much better way of thinking about it, because it's not like you're really in control of your dreams.
You don't mind what happens, not. I don't care what happens. What I don't care is it's dismissive.